for it was quite dry weather. So his mother undressed him, put him to bed, and had the teapot brought in, to make him a good cup of elderflower tea. Just at that moment the merry old man came in who lived up atop of the house all alone, for he had neither wife nor children, but he liked
Welcome to Read and Speak English Adventures. Please don't forget to subscribe my channel for more interesting and beautiful stories. Let's start.
The Elder Bush. Once upon a time there was a little boy who had taken cold. He had gone out and got his feet wet, though nobody could imagine how it had happened, for it was quite dry weather. So his mother undressed him, put him to bed, and had the teapot brought in, to make him a good cup of elderflower tea. Just at that moment the merry old man came in who lived up atop of the house all alone, for he had neither wife nor children, but he liked children very much, and knew so many fairy tales, that it was quite delightful. "Now drink your tea," said the boy's mother, "then, perhaps, you may hear a fairy tale." "If I had but something new to tell," said the old man. "But how did the child get his feet wet?" "That is the very thing that nobody can make out," said his mother. "Am I to hear a fairy tale?" asked the little boy. "Yes, if you can tell me exactly, for I must know that first, how deep the gutter is in the little street opposite, that you pass through in going to school." "Just up to the middle of my boot," said the child, "but then I must go into the deep hole." "Ah, that's where the wet feet came from," said the old man. "I ought now to tell you a story, but I don't know any more." "You can make one in a moment," said the little boy. "My mother says that all you look at can be turned into a fairy tale, and that you can find a story in everything." "Yes, but such tales and stories are good for nothing. The right sort come of themselves. They tap at my forehead and say, 'Here we are.' Won't there be a tap soon?" asked the little boy. And his mother laughed, put some elderflowers in the teapot, and poured boiling water upon them. "Do tell me something. Pray do." "Yes, if a fairy tale would come of its own accord, but they are proud and haughty, and come only when they choose." "Stop," said he, all on a sudden. "I have it. Pay attention. There is one in the teapot." And the little boy looked at the teapot. The cover rose more and more, and the elderflowers came forth so fresh and white, and shot up long branches. Out of the spout even did they spread themselves on all sides, and grew larger and larger. It was a splendid elderbush, a whole tree, and it reached into the very bed, and pushed the curtains aside. How it bloomed! And what an odor! In the middle of the bush sat a friendly-looking old woman in a most strange dress. It was quite green, like the leaves of the elder, and was trimmed with large white elderflowers, so that at first one could not tell whether it was a stuff, or a natural green and real flowers. "What's that woman's name?" asked the little boy. "The Greeks and Romans," said the old man, "called her a dryad, but that we do not understand. The people who live in the new booths have a much better name for her. They call her Old Granny, and she it is to whom you are to pay attention. Now listen, and look at the beautiful elderbush. Just such another large blooming elder tree stands near the new booths. It grew there in the corner of a little miserable courtyard, and under it sat, of an afternoon, in the most splendid sunshine, two old people, an old seaman, and his old wife. They had great-grandchildren, and were soon to celebrate the 50th anniversary of their marriage. But they could not exactly recollect the date, and old Granny sat in the tree, and looked as pleased as now. "I know the date," said she, but those below did not hear her, for they were talking about old times. "Yes, can't you remember when we were very little?" said the old seaman, and ran and played about. "It was the very same courtyard where we now are, and we stuck slips in the ground, and made a garden." "I remember it well," said the old woman. "I remember it quite well. We watered the slips, and one of them was an elderbush. It took root, put forth green shoots, and grew up to be the large tree under which we old folks are now sitting." "To be sure," said he. "And there in the corner stood a water pail, where I used to swim my boats." "True, but first we went to school to learn somewhat," said she, "and then we were confirmed." We both cried, but in the afternoon we went up the round tower, and looked down on Copenhagen, and far, far away over the water. Then we went to Frederiksberg, where the king and the queen were sailing about in their splendid barges. But I had a different sort of sailing to that, later, and that too for many a year, a long way off, on great voyages. "Yes, many a time have I wept for your sake," said she. "I thought you were dead and gone, and lying down in the deep waters. Many a night have I got up to see if the wind had not changed, and changed it had, sure enough, but you never came. I remember so well one day, when the rain was pouring down in torrents, the scavengers were before the house where I was in service. And I had come up with the dust, and remained standing at the door. It was dreadful weather, when just as I was there, the postman came and gave me a letter. It was from you. What a tour that letter had made! I opened it instantly and read. I laughed and wept. I was so happy. In it I read that you were in warm lands where the coffee tree grows. What a blessed land that must be! You related so much, and I saw it all the while the rain was pouring down, and I standing there with the dust box. At the same moment came someone who embraced me. Yes, but you gave him a good box on his ear that made it tingle, but I did not know it was you. You arrived as soon as your letter, and you were so handsome, that you still are, and had a long yellow silk handkerchief round your neck, and a brand new hat on. Oh, you were so dashing! Good heavens! What weather it was, and what a state the street was in, and then we married, said he. Don't you remember? And then we had our first little boy, and then Mary, and Nicholas, and Peter, and Christian. Yes, and how they all grew up to be honest people, and were beloved by everybody. And their children also have children, said the old sailor. Yes, those are our grandchildren, full of strength and vigor. It was, methinks, about this season that we had our wedding. Yes, this very day is the 50th anniversary of the marriage, said old Granny, sticking her head between the two old people, who thought it was their neighbor who nodded to them. They looked at each other and held one another by the hand. Soon after came their children and their grandchildren. For they knew well enough that it was the day of the 50th anniversary, and had come with their gratulations that very morning. But the old people had forgotten it, although they were able to remember all that had happened many years ago. And the elder bush sent forth a strong odor in the sun that was just about to set, and shone right in the old people's faces. They both looked so rosy-cheeked, and the youngest of the grandchildren danced around them, and called out quite delighted that there was to be something very splendid that evening. They were all to have hot potatoes. And old Nanny nodded in the bush and shouted hurrah with the rest. But that is no fairy tale, said the little boy, who was listening to the story. The thing is, you must understand it, said the narrator. Let us ask old Nanny. That was no fairy tale, 'tis true, said old Nanny, but now it's coming. The most wonderful fairy tales grow out of that which is reality. Were that not the case, you know, my magnificent elderbush could not have grown out of the teapot. And then she took the little boy out of bed, laid him on her bosom, and the branches of the elder tree, full of flowers, closed around her. They sat in an aerial dwelling, and it flew with them through the air. Oh, it was wondrous beautiful. Old Nanny had grown all of a sudden a young and pretty maiden. But her robe was still the same green stuff with white flowers, which she had worn before. On her bosom she had a real elderflower, and in her yellow waving hair a wreath of the flowers. Her eyes were so large and blue that it was a pleasure to look at them. She kissed the boy, and now they were of the same age and felt alike. Hand in hand they went out of the bower, and they were standing in the beautiful garden of their home. Near the green lawn Papa's walking stick was tied, and for the little ones it seemed to be endowed with life. For as soon as they got astride it, the round polished knob was turned into a magnificent neighing head. A long black mane fluttered in the breeze, and 4 slender yet strong legs shot out. The animal was strong and handsome, and away they went at full gallop round the lawn. Huzzah! Now we are riding miles off, said the boy. We are riding away to the castle where we were last year. And on they rode round the grass plot, and the little maiden, who we know was no one else but old Nanny, kept on crying out, Now we are in the country. Don't you see the farmhouse yonder? And there is an elder tree standing beside it, and the cock is scraping away the earth for the hens. Look how he struts. And now we are close to the church. It lies high upon the hill, between the large oak trees, one of which is half decayed. And now we are by the smithy, where the fire is blazing, and where the half-naked men are banging with their hammers till the sparks fly about. Away, away, to the beautiful country seat. And all that the little maiden, who sat behind on the stick, spoke of, flew by in reality. The boy saw it all, and yet they were only going round the grass plot. Then they played in a side avenue, and marked out a little garden on the earth, and they took elder blossoms from their hair, planted them, and they grew just like those the old people planted when they were children, as related before. They went hand in hand, as the old people had done when they were children, but not to the Round Tower, or to Fredericksburg. No, the little damsel wound her arms round the boy, and then they flew far away through all Denmark. And spring came, and summer, and then it was autumn, and then winter, and 1,000 pictures were reflected in the eye and in the heart of the boy. And the little girl always sang to him, "This you will never forget." And during their whole flight the elder tree smelled so sweet and odorous. He remarked the roses and the fresh beeches, but the elder tree had a more wondrous fragrance, for its flowers hung on the breast of the little maiden, and there, too, did he often lay his head during the flight. "It is lovely here in spring," said the young maiden, and they stood in a beechwood that had just put on its first green. where the wood roof at their feet sent forth its fragrance, and the pale red anemone looked so pretty among the verdure. Oh, would it were always spring in the sweetly smelling Danish beech forests. It is lovely here in summer, said she, and she flew past old castles of bygone days of chivalry, where the red walls and the embattled gables were mirrored in the canal, where the swans were swimming and peered up into the old cool avenues. In the fields the corn was waving like the sea. In the ditches red and yellow flowers were growing, while wild drone flowers and blooming convolvuluses were creeping in the hedges. And towards evening the moon rose round and large, and the haycocks in the meadows smelled so sweetly. This one never forgets. It is lovely here in autumn, said the little maiden, and suddenly the atmosphere grew as blue again as before. The forest grew red and green and yellow-colored. The dogs came leaping along, and whole flocks of wildfowl flew over the cairn, where blackberry bushes were hanging round the old stones. The sea was dark blue, covered with ships full of white sails, and in the barn old women, maidens, and children were sitting picking hops into a large cask. The young sang songs, but the old told fairy tales of mountain sprites and soothsayers. Nothing could be more charming. It is delightful here in winter, said the little maiden, and all the trees were covered with hoarfrost. They looked like white corals. The snow crackled underfoot, as if one had new boots on, and one falling star after the other was seen in the sky. The Christmas tree was lighted in the room, presents were there, and good humor reigned. In the country the violins sounded in the room of the peasant. The newly baked cakes were attacked, even the poorest child said, "It is really delightful here in winter." Yes, it was delightful, and the little maiden showed the boy everything, and the elder tree still was fragrant, and the red flag, with the white cross, was still waving, the flag under which the old seamen in the new booths had sailed. And the boy grew up to be a lad, and was to go forth in the wide world far, far away to warm lands, where the coffee tree grows. But at his departure the little maiden took an elder blossom from her bosom, and gave it him to keep, and it was placed between the leaves of his prayer book. And when in foreign lands he opened the book, it was always at the place where the keepsake flower lay, and the more he looked at it, the fresher it became. He felt, as it were, the fragrance of the Danish groves, and from among the leaves of the flowers he could distinctly see the little maiden, peeping forth with her bright blue eyes, and then she whispered, "It is delightful here in spring, summer, autumn, and winter," and 100 visions glided before his mind. Thus passed many years, and he was now an old man, and sat with his old wife under the blooming tree. They held each other by the hand, as the old grandfather and grandmother yonder in the new booths did, and they talked exactly like them of old times, and of the 50th anniversary of their wedding. The little maiden, with the blue eyes, and with elder blossoms in her hair, sat in the tree, nodded to both of them, and said, "Today is the 50th anniversary." And then she took 2 flowers out of her hair, and kissed them. First they shone like silver, then like gold. And when they laid them on the heads of the old people, each flower became a golden crown. So there they both sat, like a king and a queen, under the fragrant tree, that looked exactly like an elder. The old man told his wife the story of old Nanny, as it had been told him when a boy. And it seemed to both of them it contained much that resembled their own history, and those parts that were like it pleased them best. Thus it is, said the little maiden in the tree, some call me Old Nanny, others a Dryad, but in reality, my name is Remembrance. 'Tis I who sit in the tree that grows and grows. I can remember, I can tell things. Let me see if you have my flower still. And the old man opened his prayer book. There lay the elder blossom, as fresh as if it had been placed there but a short time before. And Remembrance nodded, and the old people, decked with crowns of gold, sat in the flush of the evening sun. They closed their eyes and yes, that's the end of the story. The little boy lay in his bed. He did not know if he had dreamed or not, or if he had been listening while someone told him the story. The teapot was standing on the table, but no elder tree was growing out of it. And the old man, who had been talking, was just on the point of going out at the door, and he did go. How splendid that was, said the little boy. Mother, I have been to warm countries. So I should think, said his mother. When one has drunk 2 good cupfuls of elderflower tea, 'tis likely enough one goes into warm climates. And she tucked him up nicely, lest he should take cold. You have had a good sleep while I have been sitting here, and arguing with him whether it was a story or a fairy tale. And where is Old Nanny? Asked the little boy. In the teapot, said his mother, and there she may remain. Thank you for watch.
Welcome to Read and Speak English Adventures. Please don't forget to subscribe my channel for more interesting and beautiful stories. Let's start.
The old house. In the street, up there, was a very old house. It was almost 300 years old, for that might be known by reading the great beam on which the date of the year was carved. Together with tulips and hop-binds there were whole verses spelled as in former times. And over every window was a distorted face cut out in the beam. The one story stood forward a great way over the other, and directly under the eaves was a leaden spout with a dragon's head. The rainwater should have run out of the mouth, but it ran out of the belly, for there was a hole in the spout. All the other houses in the street were so new and so neat, with large window panes and smooth walls. One could easily see that they would have nothing to do with the old house. They certainly thought, how long is that old decayed thing to stand here as a spectacle in the street? And then the projecting windows stand so far out that no one can see from our windows what happens in that direction. The steps are as broad as those of a palace, and as high as to a church tower. The iron railings look just like the door to an old family vault, and then they have brass tops that's so stupid. On the other side of the street were also new and neat houses, and they thought just as the others did, but at the window opposite the old house there sat a little boy with fresh rosy cheeks and bright beaming eyes. He certainly liked the old house best, and that both in sunshine and moonshine. And when he looked across at the wall where the mortar had fallen out, he could sit and find out there the strangest figures imaginable. Exactly as the street had appeared before, with steps, projecting windows, and pointed gables, he could see soldiers with halberds, and spouts where the water ran, like dragons and serpents. That was a house to look at, and there lived an old man, who wore plush breeches, and he had a coat with large brass buttons, and a wig that one could see was a real wig. Every morning there came an old fellow to him who put his rooms in order, and went on errands. Otherwise, the old man in the plush breeches was quite alone in the old house. Now and then he came to the window and looked out, and the little boy nodded to him, and the old man nodded again, and so they became acquaintances, and then they were friends. Although they had never spoken to each other, but that made no difference. The little boy heard his parents say, "The old man opposite is very well off, but he is so very, very lonely." The Sunday following, the little boy took something, and wrapped it up in a piece of paper, went downstairs, and stood in the doorway, and when the man who went on errands came past, he said to him, "I say, master, will you give this to the old man over the way from me? I have 2 pewter soldiers. This is one of them, and he shall have it, for I know he is so very, very lonely." And the old errand man looked quite pleased, nodded, and took the pewter soldier over to the old house. Afterwards there came a message. It was to ask if the little boy himself had not a wish to come over and pay a visit, and so he got permission of his parents, and then went over to the old house. And the brass balls on the iron railings shone much brighter than ever. One would have thought they were polished on account of the visit, and it was as if the carved-out trumpeters, for there were trumpeters who stood in tulips carved out on the door, blew with all their might. Their cheeks appeared so much rounder than before. Yes, they blew. The little boy comes. And then the door opened. The whole passage was hung with portraits of knights in armor, and ladies in silken gowns, and the armor rattled, and the silken gowns rustled. And then there was a flight of stairs which went a good way upwards, and a little way downwards, and then one came on a balcony which was in a very dilapidated state. Sure enough, with large holes and long crevices, but grass grew there and leaves out of them altogether, for the whole balcony outside, the yard, and the walls were overgrown with so much green stuff that it looked like a garden, only a balcony. Here stood old flower pots with faces and asses' ears, and the flowers grew just as they liked. One of the pots was quite overrun on all sides with pinks, that is to say, with the green part. Shoot stood by shoot, and it said quite distinctly, "The air has cherished me, the sun has kissed me, and promised me a little flower on Sunday. A little flower on Sunday." And then they entered a chamber where the walls were covered with hog's leather, and printed with gold flowers. "The gilding decays, but hog's leather stays," said the walls. And there stood easy chairs, with such high backs, and so carved out, and with arms on both sides. Sit down, said they. "Ugh, how I creak! Now I shall certainly get the gout, like the old clothes press, ugh." And then the little boy came into the room where the projecting windows were, and where the old man sat. "I thank you for the pewter soldier, my little friend," said the old man, "and I thank you because you come over to me." "Thankee, thankee," or cranky, cranky, sounded from all the furniture. There was so much of it, that each article stood in the other's way, to get a look at the little boy. In the middle of the wall hung a picture representing a beautiful lady, so young, so glad, but dressed quite as in former times, with clothes that stood quite stiff, and with powder in her hair. She neither said thankee, thankee, nor cranky, cranky, but looked with her mild eyes at the little boy, who directly asked the old man, "Where did you get her?" "Yonder, at the broker's," said the old man, "where there are so many pictures hanging. No one knows or cares about them, for they are all of them buried. But I knew her in bygone days, and now she has been dead and gone these 50 years. Under the picture, in a glazed frame, there hung a bouquet of withered flowers. They were almost 50 years old. They looked so very old. The pendulum of the great clock went to and fro, and the hands turned, and everything in the room became still older. But they did not observe it. "They say at home," said the little boy, "that you are so very, very lonely." "Oh," said he, The old thoughts, with what they may bring with them, come and visit me, and now you also come. I am very well off. Then he took a book with pictures in it down from the shelf. There were whole long processions and pageants, with the strangest characters, which one never sees nowadays. Soldiers like the knave of clubs, and citizens with waving flags. The tailors had theirs, with a pair of shears held by two lions. And the shoemakers theirs, without boots, but with an eagle that had two heads, for the shoemakers must have everything so that they can say, "It is a pair." Yes, that was a picture book. The old man now went into the other room to fetch preserves, apples, and nuts. Yes, it was delightful over there in the old house. "I cannot bear it any longer," said the pewter soldier, who sat on the drawers. "It is so lonely and melancholy here. But when one has been in a family circle, one cannot accustom oneself to this life. I cannot bear it any longer. The whole day is so long, and the evenings are still longer. Here it is not at all as it is over the way at your home, where your father and mother spoke so pleasantly, and where you and all your sweet children made such a delightful noise. Nay, how lonely the old man is! Do you think that he gets kisses? Do you think he gets mild eyes, or a Christmas tree? He will get nothing but a grave. I can bear it no longer." "You must not let it grieve you so much," said the little boy. "I find it so very delightful here." And then all the old thoughts, with what they may bring with them, they come and visit here. "Yes, it's all very well, but I see nothing of them, and I don't know them," said the pewter soldier. "I cannot bear it, but you must," said the little boy. Then in came the old man with the most pleased and happy face, the most delicious preserves, apples, and nuts, and so the little boy thought no more about the pewter soldier. The little boy returned home happy and pleased, and weeks and days passed away, and nods were made to the old house, and from the old house, and then the little boy went over there again. The carved trumpeters blew. There is the little boy. And the swords and armor on the knights' portraits rattled, and the silk gowns rustled. The hog's leather spoke, and the old chairs had the gout in their legs and rheumatism in their backs. Ugh, it was exactly like the first time, for over there one day an hour was just like another. "I cannot bear it," said the